Some celebrity deaths make headlines for weeks, splashed across every screen, every magazine cover, every news ticker. But others? They quietly fade into obscurity, their tragic stories buried by time, overshadowed by bigger names or louder scandals. Yet the pain behind their loss is just as real. These stars didn't die of natural causes or quiet accidents. Their lives were violently, senselessly cut short. Here are 5 chilling, little-known stories of celebrities who were taken far too soon. In December of 1986, a gruesome scene unfolded in one of Los Angeles' wealthiest neighborhoods, and even hardened detectives struggled to make sense of it. An actress, long forgotten by Hollywood but once romantically tied to a king, had been brutally murdered inside her crumbling hillside mansion. Her name was Susan Cabot, but before the horror, she had been Harriet Pearl Shapiro, a girl from the Bronx abandoned by her father and left motherless after her mother was committed to a psychiatric hospital. Shuffled through foster homes, she grew up in shadows, in silence. But somehow, from that chaos, a performer emerged. Susan started as a children's book illustrator, her art full of innocence she'd never known herself. Then came singing gigs, then Hollywood. She signed with Universal Pictures and became a familiar face in westerns like Tomahawk and Gunsmoke. Her beauty was classic, almost haunting, but her biggest splash came in the world of cult horror, starring in Roger Corman's The Wasp Woman, a film that would eerily mirror her own descent. By the 1960s, the spotlight dimmed. She slipped away from the public eye, retreating into a grand but deteriorating home tucked away in California's hills. And inside that house, Susan unraveled. The years weren't kind. Depression swallowed her. Paranoia twisted her thoughts. She became reclusive, suspicious of everyone. Her only connection to the outside world was her son, Timothy Roman, a boy who'd known pain before he could form words. Born with pituitary dwarfism, Timothy underwent controversial treatments using hormones taken from cadaver glands. He grew, yes, but the cost was horrifying. Years later, those same hormone batches were linked to Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, a degenerative and fatal brain disorder. And as Susan's grip on reality loosened, Timothy's mind, too, began to fracture. Then came the night of December 10th, 1986. A 911 call was placed. A burglary, Timothy claimed. A masked man had broken in, attacked them. When paramedics arrived, Timothy stood calmly outside. The house was drowning in filth, rotting food, garbage, a suffocating stench of decay. And in the bedroom, Susan. Her body was found on the bed, blood soaking through a lavender nightgown. A linen cloth was wrapped around her shattered skull. Blood painted the walls like a scene from one of her old horror movies. Only this time, the violence was real. Timothy's story began to crack almost immediately. There was no sign of forced entry, no evidence of an intruder. Police found the murder weapon hidden in his room, and then came the confession. He said she'd attacked him, said she woke up screaming, delusional, wild, lunging at him with a scalpel and a barbell. He claimed he acted in fear, that he struck back, that he didn't mean to kill her, but the damage had been done. The trial wouldn't begin until 1989, but when it did, it drew intense media attention, not for who Susan was in her prime, but for how deeply she'd fallen. Prosecutors charged Timothy with second-degree murder, but as the courtroom was flooded with images of the decaying home, with testimony of Susan's mental illness and Timothy's compromised brain, the narrative shifted. It wasn't just a murder. It was the slow-motion collapse of a family warped by trauma, failed by medicine, and forgotten by fame. Timothy's lawyers didn't try to paint him as a monster. Instead, they showed the jury a life steeped in desperation. They described a boy who had grown up in a prison of fear, watching his mother spiral into hallucinations, paranoia, and rage. Pediatric reports backed it up. Susan's emotional instability had begun harming Timothy before he was even a teenager. Judge Darlene Shemp wept during the trial. Evidence included a videotape, one that captured the rotting interiors of Susan's mansion in such visceral detail that even courtroom veterans were shaken. It wasn't just a house, it was a tomb for the living. On October 10th, 1989, Timothy was found guilty, not of murder, but of involuntary manslaughter. He was sentenced to 3 years of probation. With time served, he walked free.
50 years ago this week, actress Sharon Tate was murdered along with 4 friends in her Los Angeles home. The murders were among 7 carried out over 2 nights in the city by followers of cult leader Charles.
In the summer of 1969, a nightmare crept into Los Angeles. The illusion of safety shattered overnight. What seemed like a random act of cruelty quickly revealed itself as something far worse, a calculated killing spree Orchestrated by a manipulative madman, over 2 nights, 7 lives were taken. The brutality was unthinkable. The names of the victims would become infamous, but their killers even more so. On the night of August 8th, 4 figures moved silently through the Hollywood Hills: Charles Tex Watson, Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Linda Kasabian. They weren't lost or high. They were soldiers, following the orders of Charles Manson, a failed musician turned cult leader who had twisted a commune into a deadly following. Their target, 10050 Cielo Drive. The house once belonged to music producer Terry Melcher, who had rejected Manson's music. Now someone else lived there, someone who had nothing to do with him. Inside was actress Sharon Tate, 8.5 months pregnant, newly married to director Roman Polanski. She was with close friends, celebrity hairstylist Jay Sebring, coffee heiress Abigail Folger, screenwriter Wojciech Frykowski, and 18-year-old Stephen Parent. None of them would live to see the morning. After midnight, Watson cut the phone lines. They scaled the fence, calm and deliberate. Stephen Parent was the first to die. He sat in his car, preparing to leave. Watson approached, slashed him, and shot him 4 times. Cold, precise. Inside, Frykowski was asleep on the couch. Watson broke in through a window and let the others inside. Frykowski was kicked awake, and the group gathered the rest of the house. Tate and Sebring were tied together by the neck with a rope suspended from the ceiling. When Sebring objected to their treatment of Tate, Watson shot him and stabbed him 7 times. Abigail Folger handed over the $70 in her purse, but it made no difference. She was dragged outside and stabbed 28 times. Frykowski tried to flee but was shot, bludgeoned, and stabbed, minus 51 times in total. The attack was so violent that Watson's gun broke. Sharon Tate begged for her life and for her unborn child. She offered to be taken hostage, but her pleas meant nothing. She was stabbed 16 times and still alive when they hanged her with the rope. Her cause of death? Massive hemorrhage. Before leaving, Atkins smeared the word pig on the front door in Tate's blood. It was a message, a misdirection. Manson wanted the murders to look like the beginning of a race war, what he called helter-skelter. The next night, Manson went with them. He led the group to the home of Leno and Rosemary LaBianca, ordinary people chosen at random. Manson tied up Leno, then left. Inside, Watson stabbed him repeatedly, starting with his throat, and carved the word war into his stomach. Rosemary fought back but was overwhelmed, stabbed 41 times by 3 attackers. Their home became a slaughterhouse. In 2 nights, 7 people were dead. The city was paralyzed with fear. The randomness, the cruelty, the apparent lack of motive, it didn't make sense. For days, police couldn't connect the dots, but soon the truth began to surface. Manson and his followers were arrested. Charles Manson, Tex Watson, Patricia Krenwinkel, Susan Atkins, and Leslie Van Houten were charged. Their trial became a spectacle. They carved X's into their foreheads. They smirked, showed no remorse. All were convicted and sentenced to death. But in 1972, the California Supreme Court ruled the death penalty unconstitutional. Their sentences were reduced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole.
Where we have done a deep dive into this case. John Sweeney was Dominique's boyfriend. He strangled her to death.
It was October 1982 when the rising life of a young actress came to a brutal, heartbreaking end. She had just begun to carve her place in Hollywood, fresh off a role in the hit horror film Poltergeist, her name finally being whispered with promise. Dominique Ellen Dunne was born in Santa Monica, California, the daughter of Hollywood royalty. Her father, Dominique Dunne, was a famed writer and producer. Her brother, Griffin, would go on to direct and act in major films. By the early 1980s, she'd appeared in shows like Family and Breaking Away, and then came her breakthrough, the role of Dana Freeling, the teenage daughter in Poltergeist. She was on the cusp of something bigger. She had no idea the real horror was still ahead. In 1981, she met John Thomas Sweeney, a sous chef at the upscale restaurant Ma Maison. Their relationship burned fast. Within weeks, they moved in together, and that's when things began to unravel. Behind closed doors, the charm slipped away. What replaced it was something darker: jealous rages, sudden mood swings, terrifying violence. He wasn't just possessive, he was dangerous. By August 1982, the signs were no longer subtle. In one violent outburst, Sweeney tore clumps of Dominique's hair from her head. She ran to her mother's house, trembling and terrified, but he followed, banging on the windows, shouting. Friends begged her to stay away, and for a while she did. But like so many stories of abuse, she returned. Love and fear, guilt and hope. It's a vicious mix. And Sweeney wasn't done. A month later, he attacked her again. This time, he choked her until she could barely breathe. A friend witnessed her gasping for air afterward, her voice reduced to a hoarse whisper. October 30th, 1982. Dominique was at her West Hollywood home, rehearsing with fellow actor David Packer for a new miniseries. The evening was ordinary, lines being practiced, roles explored. Then the phone rang. It was Sweeney. He was coming over. Despite everything, she agreed to step outside and talk. Inside the house, David Packer waited. Minutes passed. Then he heard it. A sharp smack, a scream, then a sickening thud. Alarmed, he tried calling the police, but they told him it was out of their jurisdiction. With no help coming, he stepped outside and found Sweeney crouched over Dominique's limp body, his hands still on her, his voice eerily calm. "I killed my girlfriend." Paramedics rushed Dominique to Cedars-Sinai. 5 days on life support and then silence. On November 4th, her family let her go. She was 22, but the horror wasn't over. Sweeney was charged with first-degree murder. The trial should have been straightforward. The confession, the history of abuse, the eyewitnesses. But what unfolded in court stunned the nation. The defense argued it wasn't premeditated, that he didn't remember strangling her, that it was a heat-of-the-moment mistake. Key evidence was buried. Testimony from his previous girlfriend, who had been hospitalized after multiple beatings, was ruled too prejudicial for the jury to hear. Dominique's friends and mother, who could have confirmed the threats and abuse, were silenced too, their words dismissed as hearsay. The jury never saw the full picture. On September 21st, 1983, the verdict came. Not guilty of second-degree murder. Instead, Sweeney was convicted of voluntary manslaughter and misdemeanor assault. The maximum sentence was 6.5 years. He served just 2.5 before walking free in 1986. Free. Sweeney vanished after his release, changed his name, moved cities.
Crane had scheduled a noontime appointment. He didn't show up. An actress friend came here looking for him. She found his body still in bed.
It was June 29th, 1978. Inside a modest apartment complex, that illusion shattered. A lifeless body had been discovered, not just any man, but someone millions once invited into their homes through their television screens. The corpse was battered, bound. The scene? Unimaginable. Blood smeared the walls, ceiling, and bed. Whoever had done this didn't just want Bob Crane dead. They wanted it to be personal. You might not know his name now, but in the 1960s, Bob Crane was America's charismatic darling. Born Robert Edward Crane in 1928, he had a natural flair for performance. By 11, he was a drumming prodigy. Soon, he transitioned into radio, charming listeners from New York to Los Angeles with his quick wit. In LA, he became the voice of the #1 morning show. But his leap into television changed everything. In 1965, he took on the role of Colonel Hogan in Hogan's Heroes, a sitcom improbably set in a German Hutu prison camp. Against all odds, it was a hit. Crane was nominated for 2 Emmys. He had it all: fame, a smiling public image, and the adoration of millions. But as his fame soared, his private life spiraled into darkness. When the show ended in 1971, so did the magic. Crane's career stalled, his acting gigs dried up, and behind the scenes, his personal habits took a troubling turn. He became obsessed with filming his sexual encounters, often with the help of his closest friend, John Henry Carpenter. Carpenter wasn't just a sidekick. He was the supplier, the enabler. A video equipment salesman, Carpenter traveled with Crane, helping him set up and record his private escapades. The two would meet women, some of whom later claimed they had no idea they were being filmed. By 1978, Crane was trying to claw his way back to relevance, performing in a stage play in Arizona. On the day of his death, he missed a scheduled lunch. His co-star, Victoria Ann Berry, concerned, went to check on him. What she found would haunt her and the nation for years. Crane's skull had been crushed twice with what was suspected to be a heavy tripod. An electrical cord was wrapped around his neck. There were no signs of forced entry, no stolen items, just a brutal, intimate slaughter. The implication was chilling. This wasn't a random break-in. This was someone he knew. Suspicion immediately fell on Carpenter. He had flown into town just days before. Blood smears matching Crane's blood type were found inside Carpenter's rental car. It looked damning, but without DNA testing, which wasn't yet available, prosecutors hesitated. No murder weapon, no confession, just shadows and suspicion. For over a decade, the case lay cold. Until 1990, advances in forensic science breathed new life into the investigation. A forgotten photo from the crime scene resurfaced, showing what appeared to be brain tissue in Carpenter's car. The sample itself, gone. But the image was enough. In 1992, Carpenter was arrested. At trial in 1994, Bob Crane's own son, Scotty, took the stand. He told the court his father had been trying to cut ties with Carpenter, calling him an unwanted presence. Prosecutors argued that Carpenter, angry and abandoned, snapped, that he killed Crane in a jealous, bitter rage, but the defense came prepared. Witnesses claimed the two were seen dining happily just the night before. They pointed out the obvious: no murder weapon, degraded evidence, and more than a few potential suspects: jealous lovers, angry husbands, enemies from Crane's past. In the end, it wasn't enough. Carpenter was acquitted. He died in 1998, still insisting he was innocent. It was a night in 1975. In Venice, California, the streets were quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't hint at tragedy. Somewhere under those dim streetlights, a rising star in American theater and television was walking to her car, completely unaware that she had minutes left to live. Barbara Colby wasn't just another actress. She was radiant. Born on July 2, 1939, she'd found her passion for theater in high school back in New Orleans. Her talent was undeniable, her energy infectious. After graduating in 1957, she earned a scholarship to Bard College and even spent a semester studying at the Sorbonne in Paris. Like so many dreamers, she moved to Manhattan, juggling waitressing and secretarial jobs while chasing the stage with everything she had. And it paid off. By 1964, Barbara had audiences captivated in 6 characters in search of an author, and a year later, she debuted on Broadway. She glowed in every role, from classic Shakespearean parts to modern dramas. But it wasn't just her acting, it was her presence, her husky voice. That booming, full-body laugh, the way she lit up a room. People remembered her, admired her, loved her, and television noticed too. By the early 1970s, Barbara was working on both coasts, appearing in popular series. Her guest role as Sherry on The Mary Tyler Moore Show made such an impression that she was cast as Julie Erskine in a brand new spin-off called Phyllis, starring Cloris Leachman. It was her moment, her breakthrough. She had just finished filming the first 3 episodes. She was on the brink of something big. Then, everything stopped. On July 24, 1975, Barbara had spent the evening doing what she loved, teaching an acting class. The session wrapped up around 11:50 p.m. She and fellow actor James Kiernan walked together to their car, parked in a nearby lot. It wasn't unusual for actors to linger there and chat under the streetlights. Another friend, Ron Rifkin, usually joined them, but that night he stayed home sick, a twist of fate that likely saved his life. As Barbara and James neared their vehicle, a light-colored van pulled up. No words, no warning, no signs of a struggle. 2 men stepped out and opened fire. A single bullet struck Barbara, through her left arm, into her chest, puncturing her lung. She collapsed. James, too, was shot. A nearby resident heard the screams, the shots, and called the police. When officers arrived minutes later, Barbara was gone. She was just 36 years old. James was still alive, barely. He was rushed to David Brotman Memorial Hospital, but he died at 1:32 a.m. In his final moments, he told police what he could. He didn't know the men. The attack was fast, silent, and terrifyingly deliberate. Authorities launched a manhunt. 6 young men were arrested and questioned, but nothing stuck. No motive, no link, no justice. Was it a case of mistaken identity, a random act of violence, or something far more personal, far more sinister? Decades later, no one knows. The murder stunned Hollywood. Her colleagues were devastated. The world never got to see what Barbara Colby was truly capable of. The first 3 episodes of Phyllis aired posthumously that September. Viewers watched her on screen, smiling, glowing, unaware that the woman they were falling in love with had already been taken.